Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on Om Times flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about life after death, heaven and hell, and reincarnation. Christopher Bache is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University, Adjunct Faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies, Emeritus Fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and he's on the Advisory Council of Groff Legacy Training. An award-winning teacher and international speaker, he is the author of 4 books, including one that I rate as one of my favorite of all time, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven, which chronicles his 20-year psychedelic journey exploring consciousness. And the other book, which we're going to be discussing today, is Lifecycles, Reincarnation, and the Web of Life, which combines scientist testimonies about reincarnation with the synthesis of findings from consciousness research and near-death studies. Christopher Bache, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Sandie. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
You too. So, Lifecycles has been hailed as the first book to both describe the dynamics of rebirth and explore the ramifications of adopting a reincarnationist perspective. Now, this was published, 35 years ago?
Thereabouts, yeah.
So that was right after you had started your journey with LSD. How many years into that journey, and how did that journey inspire this?
Well, I started my psychedelic work after 1 year, my first year of being an academic, and I worked for 4 years, and then I stopped for 6 years. And during that 6-year interval, I did 3 years of past life therapy, uncovering and working with my own former lives, and I wrote Lifecycles. So my psychedelic work by that time had reached deeply enough that I had been given many personal insights into karma, the deeper cause and effect that underlies our lives. But at that time, I had not had personal experiences of my former lives in a psychedelic context. I had in a hypnotherapy context, but not a psychedelic context. But it really was my study of Ian Stevenson and then later other pioneers in the research documenting children and adults with validated, verified past lives memories that really became the foundation for my work in Lifecycles.
Yeah, I mean, you shared a few of those stories, which I have, read before, and they're absolutely fascinating because the whole circumstances, there's just so much evidence there that, you really can't question it. One of them that really interested me was the child who you mentioned, Dr. Helen Wambach, who had a patient, a 5-year-old girl who rejected human contact and withdrew into childhood autism. But somehow she demonstrated mathematical and reading skills, which she had not been taught. But she would not communicate. But then over the period of their work together, she showed Dr. Wambach how she felt, what she was feeling by force feeding her with, a baby bottle, because she felt totally, like she was being treated like a helpless infant. Yeah. And when the doctor, understood that, then the child started coming into herself. Yeah. but she lost the reading and she lost the mathematics. I mean,
Yeah.
stories like that are just,
Yeah.
what do you make of them?
Well, what I make of them is that life is much long. Our lives, our personal lives, let's say our individual lives, are much longer than we presently tend to think that they are, and that they're always beginning and starting, and there are overlaps. And once you understand the larger life of the soul, then this kind of continuity of qualities, knowledge, learning, attitudes, traumas, virtues that are kind of blending from one life into the start of another life, where we pick up and continue to the learning. I'm making it overly linear and overly simple, but that basic idea that there is a blending. We don't start our lives a tabula rasa. We don't start our lives blank. We start our lives with a history, which is a specific history, which we can see very clearly when we begin to look at children with fresh eyes.
Why is it the last? It's always the last life, that they seem to talk about.
Well, it's not always the last life, actually, in the literature. Stevenson's research focuses on children who have an active recall of their most immediate former life, their last life. But remember that Stevenson's research is addressing a very unusual population, children who have spontaneous memories of their former lives. Most people do not have spontaneous memories of their former lives. His children are reincarnating very quickly compared to the population at large, only an average of 2.5 years, and very close to their life circumstance of their previous life, 50 years. Studies which look at larger populations of people who don't have spontaneous recall indicate a longer time frame between lifetimes and a much broader geographical radius. So that is a little bit of a distortion from the research protocol. When we look at therapy, people come to the therapeutic literature, people come to therapy because of pain, and sometimes this pain is grounded in something that happened to them in their recent past, their recent incarnational past, but not always. Sometimes it comes from several lifetimes before. So the way I think of it is our former lives are like a deck of playing cards. We may have had 52 lives, but only a handful of those cards are active in this present life. And those, let's say 5 cards, come from different centuries and only weave together certain elements of those 5 lives into the composite that makes up the present life. So when we kind of develop a more textured understanding, we begin to understand that it's not a linear development from life to lifetime, is that we go back to the soul holds all of our former lives, and then the soul decides which of those former lives in which combination it's going to incarnate into as the next incarnation.
Yeah, you mentioned the word soul, but in the book you make a distinction between soul and oversoul.
Yeah.
So what is the difference?
Well, and then at the end of the book, I dissolve that distinction. But the distinction is that for Westerners who are accustomed to thinking of the soul as the spiritual essence of this present lifetime, we need a larger concept of soul to include all of our former lifetimes. And for that, I use the concept of the oversoul, borrowing that term from other people. At the end, in the end of the book, I say it gets increasingly cumbersome to maintain this division. And for me, the soul, and I usually differentiate it by a capital S. Soul with a capital S is what I mean by the oversoul, the consciousness that holds all of our lifetimes. Soul with the small s is the consciousness that's integrating all my experiences in this incarnation.
So the oversoul is what some people would call the higher self, the part of them that, continues forever.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So I was doing some research today and I came across this article on Psychology Today by Dr. Alex Lickerman, who is a Buddhist, but he doesn't believe in reincarnation. But he said that the real question at the heart of reincarnation is not one of evidence, but one of identity.
Yeah. Good point. I haven't read that article. I'd be interested in seeing what he says. Yeah, I think once you move into a reincarnational worldview, the concept of identity shifts and expands, because I accept this body and my personality as my current identity. And, if I have deep mystical experiences of oneness with the universe, that I would accept a universal cosmic principle as my deeper identity. The concept of the soul is kind of intermediate position, isn't it? Because it's, on the one hand, it's individual. Because my soul and your soul are different in that they reflect different histories and they have an individuated quality. But if you ask the question, what is the essence of the soul? What is the essence of that spiritual identity? Then it comes back down to the same mystical insights. The essence of one is the essence of all. The essence is the essence of the divine, some would say, or the cosmic intelligence, the cosmic principle. But it is the question of identity is really quite critical. Shifting into a reincarnational worldview doesn't undermine the value or the integrity of this identity, but it recontextualizes that identity within the soul's identity, which is the metaconsciousness, which holds the 100,000 years, say, of identity of all of our lifetime experiences.
It's very hard to believe that you have a different identity, that you are not, this thing that you've lived with for so many years. It's even harder to think that actually, the oversoul or that essence of you is infinite. It's lived forever and it will live forever. I mean, that's a hard one to get your head around.
Well, it's hard in the beginning, but it gets easier with practice, both intellectual practice, but particularly with experiential practice and experiential access. It's one thing to be intellectually convinced by the evidence that reincarnation is a principle operating in life. And then when you begin to look at life through that lens, a lot of things begin to make sense, which didn't make sense before, and that deepens one's sense of opening to that. But when you actually sort of turn within and follow your awareness deeper within your own consciousness, so deep that eventually it taps into levels of your own self-awareness, which predates your physical body, and you learn the stories of that self-awareness that come from another life, and those experiences of that former life have a distinct quality of being you while being other than you, but you know that they are you. And if you encounter several such lives and you dialogue with them and you work with them, then it kind of causes a dilation within your, not only in your thinking, but within your heart, that it becomes easier to accept this transcendent, though individuated, but transcendent dimension to your identity. And eventually it becomes hard to think smaller than that. It actually becomes hard to take this as your only identity. That just,
I'm going to ask you some questions, some of the most common questions that crop up with this subject. And, the first one is, why do we reincarnate?
Well, to learn, to grow, to become more than we are. And that really kind of gets down to the very basic question, what is the purpose of existence? If we think we don't reincarnate, if we only live one lifetime, then if there is a purpose to existence, it must be something that can be realized within however many years we have in one lifetime. But if we live an open-ended number of lives, then it invites us to expand our understanding of what the universe is doing in us, with all that time. And so it opens up an open-ended developmental possibility. We now have an understanding of the universe's time frame for the creation of galaxies and planets and systems and so on. But we've been excluded from that because we haven't had a sufficiently expansive understanding of ourselves. Reincarnation invites us to open up into an expansive understanding of our individual participation in the cosmic unfolding. And so we have all these lives in order to learn more, to become more, to actualize more. And it's not simply a matter of becoming enlightened, though that's a noble goal unto itself. Enlightenment is simply a stage in an evolutionary progression which extends far beyond enlightenment. I mean, if you just think ahead, what could we become if we had 1,000,000 years more or 1,000,000,000 years more?
I have a problem with this because if we are sparks of God, if we know everything when we leave, and many people say suddenly they understand everything, and they're in a whole other kind of their awareness is so expanded. Why do we need to learn more? How much more is there to learn? Aren't we complete when we're there, but then we actually kind of regress when we come here? And I don't understand the point of that.
Well, that would be like asking too, a real good question, when the infinite, before creation, before manifesting the physical universe, why would the creative principle manifest the physical universe, which almost is inherently less self-aware, less knowledgeable? And I think it's not so much we do expand our knowledge much, much more when we die, whether it seems like it is infinite knowledge. Maybe it is, but maybe there's even more than what we think of as infinite knowledge. But the real question becomes, if God were to come to us and say, would you help me grow this universe? Would you bring as much knowledge as you can into your person and help me grow this universe into a higher form of physical manifestation of our spiritual nature? So it's not simply what happens to us when we die. I think we get a glimpse, we expand, we get a contact. The question is, who would turn down the invitation to actually participate in a creative process which will produce higher and higher and higher, deeper and deeper and deeper forms of humanity in evolution, in history, so that truly we will eventually be able to make heaven on earth. We won't simply be imprisoned and dumb and stupid when we incarnate. We will be enlightened. We will be infinitely aware in our physical incarnation. I think this is the trajectory that we're on. So it's becoming more and more and participating in the dance of creation.
I can follow that some of the way. I'd be there saying, I'll participate. But the fact is, to then come here and forget everything and to really be living like you're starting all over again, all the knowledge, all the wisdom that you've gathered over all of those years, what happens to it?
But we don't forget everything, do we? Because we may lose a fair amount of our conscious recall, but what we have known is built into our unconscious recall. Just like these children who may not remember how they acquired that mathematical knowledge or other kinds of knowledge, but it's there. We may not remember how we developed the capacities that are now natural to us, but there is a history behind everything that we are. So we don't really forget it all. We just forget some of it, but we bring a lot of it into our very being. And then we express that knowledge in our life, and we develop so that by the time we finish, we have become more. We have incarnated more completely some of that knowledge than we were at the beginning of our lifetime.
So many, we've all seen mediums who bring loved ones, to people. How is it that if somebody has passed over and they're either in the bardo or they're reincarnated or they're doing whatever they're doing, how is it that they come back, they can reconnect to that identity in that moment to give that, bereaved loved one whatever message they need?
Yeah. Well, now we're getting into the nuts and bolts of the soul. It's a good question, and I'm going to give a short answer to a long question. This is an ideal scenario, but a not uncommon scenario. I think when we die, we return to the soul, and after a transitional period where we evaluate our past life, and we evaluate what went right, what went wrong, and we assimilate that learning, we return to the soul and we begin to naturally exchange what we might think of as our small identity for our large identity, our 100-year identity for a 100,000-year identity, so that Chris Bache no longer lives just as Chris Bache, but is restored to the total knowledge of my soul. Now, let's say my father died when I was 18. Okay. So when I die, I may want to see my dad. And if I get the opportunity to see my dad, whether or not his soul has incarnated an aspect of him in a subsequent incarnation, I think it works something like this. When my being wants to meet my dad, his soul comes to me, but manifesting the front image of that soul would be the being that I had known him as, which would be my father. So Chris Bache would meet his father. But soon, before too long, it would be a matter of soul to soul. So Chris Bache's soul would be meeting my father's soul, and we would be having a much deeper conversation than simply Chris Bache speaking to his father. Now we're having a cosmic conversation. Now, I think the mediums can contact people who are discarnate, but that we should be careful before we infer that the form in which the medium encounters them is the form in which they are truly existing in their post-death state. I think a lot of our fascination and compulsion even to communicate with those who have died in the form in which we knew them reflects a limited understanding of what happens to us when we die. And it tends to reflect a Western understanding that when we die, we are judged and we go to heaven or hell or purgatory or some level of the bardo. And it's a pretty short-term concept. I am not particularly interested in communicating to my father as I knew him, when there's so much more could take place in our exchange.
So, in a sense, the soul of the person that comes through for somebody is, in a way, doing something with compassion, and they're just stepping into.
Yeah, they're wearing the out of compassion, the presence of that this person had known them as, and communicating to that person through that persona. But that persona isn't necessarily who they truly are now.
Another common question is, and until I read this book, I didn't know how to answer it, is, well, how can there be reincarnation? There's far more people on the planet now than there were, 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I'll answer with an analogy, start there. If you were at a university and the university had 6,000 students and you never left campus, you lived on campus, and there was a rhythm every semester, there were fewer people that went home, and then every semester they came back. But over a few years, you would notice that the population of the campus is getting bigger. And you might wonder, where are all these extra people coming from? But of course, they're coming from a town outside of campus, which is a much, much larger town than the number of people on campus. And I think it's like that with reincarnation. We have no reason for believing that the number of souls available to incarnate is finite or that it's small, and that all of them were present at some early point in Earth's evolutionary history, and therefore we have to explain where all the extra souls are coming from. Perhaps there are billions of souls in line waiting to take up positions as positions become available in the Earth School. We have no reason for believing that the number of souls is finite or that they were all present on Earth in the beginning. So we just have to, the invitation here is to open up to understanding that the spiritual universe is many, many times larger than the physical universe. Robert Monroe, his work in out-of-body work in the Monroe Institute, emphasizes over and over. The physical universe is a small slice of reality. Most of reality is spiritual.
But wasn't it Robert Monroe who also said that some humans evolved from higher animals?
Yeah, actually, that is the common view of most reincarnation societies. That is, if we follow the line back and ask, where does reincarnation begin? They generally think that it doesn't begin with human consciousness. It begins farther back in our animal pedigree. So reincarnation seems to be a dynamic that is correlated with the birth of individuality. Hard to see grass as individual, but sooner or later we have individuated consciousness emerging within the animal kingdom. Reincarnation seems to be a function of that individuated consciousness exploring and empowering and expanding itself. And that starts before human beings.
Now we're actually getting, I think it's Dr. Linda Backman, who does past life regression, who was trained with Michael Newton. And he told her that the time would come when many the lives they accessed were not lived on this planet. And that's actually happening, she said. I mean, her books are full of stories of, people's experiences that they connect with previous life somewhere else entirely.
Well, we'd have to ask, at least on a theoretical level, why not? Yeah. If we just look up at the universe and look through the Hubble telescope and all the wonderful images that are coming to us, and we see life burgeoning and stars and planets, why shouldn't there be evolved life on those forms? And if reincarnation is possible, then why should it only be restricted to one star system? Yeah. Why might not there be some type of interplanetary crossovers? I don't have any personal experience of that myself, but I know that she does. And so I think, well, that's interesting.
It is interesting. It is. We're going to take a short break now. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. My guest today is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University. And I won't read the rest of what you do other than you're an international speaker, a teacher, and an author, Christopher Bache. And we're discussing the compelling research and the tantalizing questions raised in his book, Lifecycles, Reincarnation and the Web of Life. Still to come, what happens to those identities that we once thought were us? Why was reincarnation removed from the scriptures? Why is our time between lives as important to our development as our earthly phase? And more. Stay tuned.
Times TV.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of Times flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And as an author, editor, and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who have walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees and no BS, just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and cities. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the city. And the cities are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Christopher Bache. So I'm rather attached to this, personality. The thought that it might disappear at some point, like an actor just shedding a role that they've played, take off the costume and never to be seen or heard from again.
It's said never to be heard and seen from again.
Well, in that form.
Oh, in that form. Well,
in that form, I don't like that idea. I mean, I'd like to know that, maybe I could connect with her sometime. Maybe I could even bring her back and be that character again. Do you think any of that is possible?
Well, I think the essence and the system of our lives is preserved beautifully intact when we die. We take with us not only all of our memories, but we take with us a living and vivid version of the experiences that we had on Earth in technicolor and stereo, as the near-death episode experiences have shown us. When they relive their life, they relive it in much, much more detail than they were ever remember having it in the first place. So not only do we continue perfectly intact, but we continue in this super saturated version of ourselves. And all of that is taken forward. All of that is brought into the soul. And the soul can crystallize its larger consciousness in any of its forms, or it can actualize all of their integrated consciousness into a singular integrated form. And in the end, I'm only willing to give this 100 years, if that, it's just, it's just too limited. I mean, why ride a bicycle when you can have a spaceship? I mean, it's so much. So there's no sense of sacrifice. I think there's a sense maybe of trading up.
Sometimes I think that I'm not very elevated in my consciousness,
Mhm.
and if I have been alive for millennia, then I'm really not doing a very good job, because I would like to think, after all of that time, that I'd be further on.
Mhm.
I tend to look at things like people or beings like spirit guides and angels and ascended masters as they were once, just as human as me, enjoyed a human life perhaps,
Yeah.
and have reached such an elevated state. I mean, is it conceivable that I could be one of them one day?
Well, yes, of course it's conceivable, because your essential nature already is one of those beings. But let me just kind of flip this a little bit. I've been teaching this stuff for years, and I had just generations and generations of students come through my courses. And one of the things I've learned is you can't judge. You can't read a book by looking at the cover. You can't judge a person's soul development by looking at what they're dealing with. And it's kind of like at a university. Somebody can have developed a great deal of expertise in music, for example, but then they decide to start developing an expertise in their art. And so they let go of their expertise in music in order to start a whole new course regimen in art. And if you were to look at only what they do in art, you might think, oh, this person is a freshman, when really they're a very sophisticated senior with all these other skills. And I think it's also that way for the soul too. So, I mean, look at what you do. You're an enormous influencer. You're hosting one spiritual dialogue after another. You're touching thousands and thousands of people's lives. How could your soul, if your soul were in the bardo, say, in a pre-incarnated state, and you were given the opportunity to bring down some sense of what you know, some aspiration, some capacity and enthusiasm for exploring spiritual knowledge, but not by yourself in a monastic context, but in a platform that reaches out into the world at a time in history when the world needs this type of knowledge. So my basic sense is, don't sell yourself short. I mean, I think there are many more bodhisattvas in the world than we think.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. Okay, so another question. White light. Several spiritual teachers are of the opinion that we should not go towards the light, as we will be trapped in cycles of reincarnation, they say. They say you can bypass that and go somewhere else. What do you think of that one?
Well, it doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't compute for me. To me, the white light, just at a simple level, when we separate from our body, the white light is our homing beacon, taking us back home, taking us back to our essential nature, our deeper spirit, our deeper divine nature. Now, the basic classic idea is people instinctively move towards the light, and they move as far towards the light as they feel comfortable. And at some point along the way, for various reasons, people feel less comfortable, or they feel sort of it's more natural just to stop and drop off. And they're at that level of spiritual development that they feel most comfortable in the thousands and thousands of levels of the bardo. And so the admonition for, and from that level, they will eventually go through a process in which they will make the choice to incarnate again. the admonition in most spiritual traditions is to do a kind of training that allows you to be comfortable with the light so that you can follow the light all the way home, all the way through all the levels of the bardo, all the way to the most intense form of that light, which resides within what the Buddhists call extra samsaric reality. So a reality which is outside the entire reincarnating universe altogether. So to me, whether our journey into the light takes us back to our own natural level of peak spiritual realization, or whether it takes us all the way back beyond all those intermediate levels to the highest level, it doesn't make any much difference. To me, it makes most sense to follow the light all the way as far as you can.
Yeah, well, you've seen that, haven't you?
I have, and it touched me in a way that has affected the entire rest of my life.
Yeah. So why was reincarnation taken out of Christianity? I mean, for the first 500 years of Christianity, it was a vital component. And then Justinian removed it.
Yeah. Well, that's a complex story. And that I was first an historian of early Christianity. That was my first academic love. And the search for the historical Jesus was my first. I did my master's at Cambridge in the search for the historical Jesus. And it's a complex process. And I don't think the definitive story has yet been written. Did Jesus teach reincarnation? It certainly is present in some of the Gnostic Gospels, but do those Gnostic Gospels reflect the actual teaching of the historical Jesus? And if Jesus did teach reincarnation, then we have to explain why it was filtered out. Or if he did teach reincarnation, why isn't it more thoroughly saturating the earliest level of the scriptural tradition? However we answer those, and we don't have the time to answer those today, it clearly is the case that there were multiple variations of Christianity in the early centuries, and some of those variations taught reincarnation, and they also taught the empowerment of women, that women should have clerical capacities and responsibilities, so on and so forth, and both of those elements were filtered out of the tradition. It is Geddes McGregor, who is was a Christian theologian, wrote numerous books on early Christian thought around reincarnation. He's of the opinion that there is nothing inherently contradictory to the belief in reincarnation and the teachings of the essential Jesus, kind of the early core teachings of Jesus. But it gives an individual too much autonomy for their spiritual welfare in the historical context of the collapse of the Roman Empire, the emergence of of highly centralized authority. The church saw this highly centralized network of priests, bishops, cardinals, the Pope, as essential to the salvation of the church, and therefore to all whom the church served. So I would give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they thought they were doing a good thing by really creating this system that made individuals contingent upon the intermediate clergy and the authority of the church. Now, from a reincarnational perspective, they didn't do a good thing. It took us a long time to uncover this deeper teaching that where each one of us is responsible for our relationship with the divine. The church may help us, but in the end, the church is not essential to the maturing of our relationship to the divine.
Well, I have another question about that. I mean, you devoted, chapter 6 to the question of whether there's room for reincarnation in Christian thought. You wrote that 35 years ago. I'd like to know in a minute if your view on that has changed. But before we do that, I want to make sure we get this one in. Talk about the hidden phase of life, the time between lives, which you say is just as important to our development.
Yeah. And that's actually why I named the book Lifecycles. I wish I had named it a little bit differently, because it became acutely significant to me that if you look at the cycle of life as only taking place between birth and death, you're missing half of the cycle. We miss what happens between death and birth. And you have to look at the whole cycle to understand the rhythm of the soul, the rhythm of human consciousness. And so there are, just as there are kind of standardized gradations of what happens when a child is born, there's a standardized process of what happens when we die. And I think Michael Newton's work is some of the best work I've seen explaining what happens in the minutes, hours, years, using time in a non-time universe after we die. The integration, the introspection, the review of our most recent life, looking at it deeply from within a spiritual perspective, looking at our relationships and our challenges, and from a deeper spiritual perspective, integrating all of our successes and failures, really internalizing them, entering into the civilization of spiritual beings, in the civilization and in the community of fellow soul travelers, and enjoying the recess, the return to a more complete spiritual awareness of existence. And then in time, a gradual focusing into the next challenge that we set for ourselves. Because it's like a university. You finish a semester, you take your exams, you digest and rest for a bit, but you make then choices for what you're going to take next semester. And Newton shows that these choices are done not by ourselves, but under the guidance and tutelage of our guides, our more senior spiritual beings. And we have some insight into the lives that we're choosing. We have options, and we make a choice that this particular set of challenges suits my particular needs, where I am in my development, or it gives me an opportunity to be of service in ways that I haven't experienced before. And then we make those choices, and then we've engaged the incarnational process, and we wake up kicking and screaming as a newborn child. If you understand the whole of the cycle, then you have the beginnings of a much deeper understanding of what makes life tick in a human psyche than if you only pay attention from birth to death.
So I was doing some research on statistics, and I discovered that it seems to, very obviously rough numbers, but something like over 57% of people in the world believe in life after death.
Yeah.
Between 12 and 44%, depending on which country you're looking at, believe in reincarnation.
Yeah.
But 75% believe in heaven and hell.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder, because if only 57 believe in life after death, where's that extra? Where do they think heaven and hell is? I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about heaven and hell?
And 25% of American Protestants and about the same percentage of American Catholics believe in reincarnation. That's one of the statistics that really blows my mind. Heaven and hell. I think in some ways the Buddhists get closest to it, and their basic vision is when we die, we enter in a universe, a stage of our life where what we are is mirrored back to us in our experience. So if we've done good in life, if we've been generous and kind and thoughtful, then that is mirrored back to us in the experience of heaven or the heavenly beings. If we've done harm and injury and selfish and stingy things and hurt people, then that is simply mirrored back to us, not out of punishment, but to educate us. And this is the experience of hell. So from this perspective, hell is the experience of our shortcomings. Heaven is the experience of our joys. And I think that works. And Newton, his cosmology seems to integrate that. But this is would be mistakenly and could be mistakenly interpreted as a cosmological absolute, when really it's simply a stage in our debriefing. It's a stage that we go through. I think the deeper reality is that there is a heaven of heavens. There is a heaven beyond the heaven of our feedback to our own goodness. There is a heaven of heavens, a reality of infinite love, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss, within which the entire human evolutionary saga is just a small piece and should not be taken as defining the limits of the universe. Is there similarly a hell of hells? Is there an eternal hell? And I absolutely do not believe there is. It has not been so in my experience at all. That is simply a theological mistake, a mistaken interpretation. Now, I think there is accountability. We are responsible for the actions that we take, and there is an accountability. Nobody gets out scot-free. But that accountability does not include this loathsome idea of eternal damnation or eternal punishment. No mother or father would do that to their child for making mistakes. And likewise, the supreme intelligence of the universe would not do that to human beings. Now, having said that, let me step into something different. As you know from my book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, I have entered and spent many years and days in hell realms, in experiencing extreme torture of that looks like a hell realm. And my understanding eventually of this is this: just as my individual psyche retains all my individual memories, both good ones and traumatic ones, there is a consciousness of the human species which retains all of its memories and processes all of those memories in a central psychological condition, what Jung called the collective unconscious. And that means all the terrible things that human beings have done to each other, all the wars, all the horrors, and all the injustices, and all the rapes and the pillaging, to the extent that those have not been clarified or healed or removed, they become part of the collective torment, the collective shadow of humanity. So you might say that within the human psyche, there are clusters of memories that have a hellish quality. But that doesn't mean that there is a cosmological state of being of hell, because just as individuals have bad experiences that they can then clear from their system, the human species can have terrible trauma, which it is in the process of clearing from its system. Okay? And I think that in the early church, maybe some of the people who had contact with these collective hellish realms mistakenly interpreted them as a cosmological principle of eternal hell.
Well, we've got about 4 minutes left, less than that. Quickly go back to this question whether there is room for reincarnation in Christian thought. You say that it would only take a small...
Yeah. I think, of course, traditional Christianity would say, no, there's no room for it whatsoever, one life, eternal hell. But I think there are many... Christianity has committed itself that if anything can be demonstrated as a fact, then we'll find out how it works and work it into Christian theology. And if reincarnation is demonstrated as a fact, which I think it has been and is being, then Christianity will find out how it works and how to make room for it. All we have to do to incorporate reincarnation within a Christian framework is expand the notion of the age of the soul. We can even give Jesus a unique role in salvation history if we want to. We may choose to expand to see Jesus as part of a whole brotherhood and sisterhood of awakened beings helping humanity. But even if we wanted to make Jesus the unique savior of Christianity, all we have to do is open up the notion that the journey of the soul is a journey of maturation that takes place over many lifetimes. It's not finished in one lifetime. And all of a sudden, the inadequacies that have been foisted on Christianity by this terribly short-sighted assumption that we only have one lifetime. So if you only live 6 days and you die, there's a consequence to that. Or if you are a bad person or you do something bad in the first 10 years of your life, you could go to hell for the rest of your life. These terrible consequences, the kindness of the universe, the compassion of Jesus has much more room to grow in a world which understands that he's talking to souls. He's not simply talking to personalities. He's talking to souls in his teaching.
Last question, very quickly. You end the book by talking about the web of life, understanding the rhythms of our life as an ongoing dialogue, which you've kind of covered in what you've just said, more or less. Is there anything that you want to add to that?
I've lived in the reincarnational worldview so long, and I've taught it and talked with people and listened to their stories and processes people's life experience, that it is so natural to me to understand the uniqueness of every soul and the uniqueness of every incarnation and the complex background web between lives and circumstances, that to see life in the old way, what I used to see it in this kind of silo way, is completely unnatural, intellectually and spiritually untenable, and spiritually unnourishing. So to me, reincarnation doesn't answer all our questions, but it is the beginning of deeper and deeper and deeper questions and deeper answers, which brings a true richness and deep satisfaction to the life process. It takes out this terrible horror of a good God who is
Chris,
loving.
I think I'm going to have to cut you there. It looks like we've gone over time.
Okay.
I am so sorry, but
That's okay.
what can I say? You know, talking to you is always fascinating. Christopher Bache, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sandie.
So Lifecycles, Reincarnation and the Web of Life is still available in paperback format. And for more information about LSD and the Mind of the Universe and Chris's other books, articles and events, visit his website, chrisbache.com. That's it for this week. I'll be back at the same time next week with another What is Going On. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Chris Bache.
Thank you, Sandie.